The black SUV sat across the street from Isaiah Turner's house at 2:14 in the morning with its headlights off and engine still running. Rain slid slowly down Isaiah's windshield while the security app on his phone replayed the same 12-second motion alert again and again. A tall man in a dark wool coat walked casually across Isaiah's front porch carrying what looked like a garment bag before the camera angle cut out near the side entrance. Not rushed. Not nervous. Comfortable. Isaiah stared at the paused frame under the weak glow of the freight yard parking lot where 18-wheelers moved through puddles behind him. He'd spent the last 16 hours managing emergency reroutes after a chemical spill shut down half the interstate system outside Houston. Exhaustion sat deep behind his eyes. But exhaustion didn't erase patterns. And that man moved like he already knew the house. If you're listening from somewhere that gets storms like this, you already know rain makes certain silences feel heavier than they should. Isaiah locked his phone slowly and drove home through empty streets lined with closed gas stations and flickering traffic lights. The house looked normal when he arrived. Porch light glowing. Kitchen light still on. Quiet suburban calm sitting perfectly in place like nothing underneath it had shifted. But the second Isaiah stepped inside, something felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain immediately. The air carried unfamiliar cologne beneath the smell of Monique's vanilla candles. Not cheap cologne either. Expensive. Sharp. Layered. Isaiah closed the door carefully behind him while water dripped from his work jacket onto the hardwood floor. "You're home early," Monique called from the kitchen. Her voice came too quickly. Like she'd been waiting to hear the door. Isaiah walked toward the kitchen slowly, boots heavy against the floorboards. Monique stood near the marble island wearing silk sleepwear and soft makeup that hadn't been there when he left before sunrise yesterday. 2 wine glasses rested beside the sink. One half rinsed. The other untouched. Isaiah noticed both instantly without reacting. "Chemical spill rerouted half the fleet," he said calmly. "Shift got cut short." Monique nodded too fast. "That's crazy." She reached for one of the glasses almost automatically and turned away toward the sink before meeting his eyes fully. Body language. Tiny movements. Isaiah had spent 20 years managing drivers, warehouse crews, dispatch supervisors, and union negotiations. He knew when people adjusted themselves before speaking. His eyes drifted toward the dining table where a folded men's sports coat hung carelessly over the back of a chair. Dark charcoal. Expensive stitching. Not his. Monique followed his gaze a fraction too late before quickly stepping between the table and the kitchen island. "Tasha stopped by earlier," she said. "Her husband left that after dinner." Isaiah looked at the coat again. Too large for Tasha's husband. Different style too. But Isaiah only nodded once and removed his soaked work gloves carefully. The dishwasher hummed softly in the background while rain tapped against the windows overlooking the backyard pool. Somewhere upstairs, floorboards creaked faintly. Isaiah's eyes lifted for half a second. Then silence again. Monique smiled too quickly afterward. "You want me to heat something up?" she asked. Isaiah studied her face quietly. She looked beautiful. Controlled. Polished. But something underneath the performance felt rushed tonight. "I'm good," he answered. He walked toward the hallway instead, exhaustion heavy in his shoulders. On the staircase landing, Isaiah stopped without warning. Near the outlet beside the hallway console table sat a silver charging dock holding a luxury watch face illuminated dimly blue in the dark. Isaiah stared at it silently. Rolex. Not his. He never wore watches to the yard because freight equipment destroyed jewelry fast. Behind him, Monique's footsteps froze almost completely. Neither of them spoke for 2 full seconds. Then Monique forced out a soft laugh. "Marcus forgot that earlier too," she said casually. "Real estate meeting. Marcus Vale." Isaiah recognized the name vaguely from one of Monique's networking stories months ago. Commercial developer. Expensive suits. Downtown money. Isaiah reached down slowly and unplugged the charger from the wall. Still warm. Meaning it hadn't been sitting there long. His expression never changed, but something cold moved quietly through his chest anyway. Because suddenly the black SUV outside his house, the second wine glass, the unfamiliar coat, the creaking floorboards upstairs, and the expensive watch charger in his hallway no longer felt separate. They felt organized. Coordinated. Like pieces of a routine already practiced before tonight. Then Isaiah noticed one final detail that made him stand completely still. The home security system panel near the staircase displayed a secondary guest access code active inside the house. A code Isaiah never created. Isaiah stood in the upstairs hallway long after Monique disappeared into the bedroom. The glowing security panel beside the staircase still displayed the active guest access code in pale blue light. Temporary user 03. Enabled. Isaiah stared at it silently while rain moved across the second-floor windows behind him. He never created temporary guest codes. Never needed to. Their house operated on routines. Predictable systems. Isaiah believed systems kept people safe. Freight routes. Payroll schedules. Mortgage drafts. Security access. But now another system existed inside his home that he hadn't built himself. He opened the control settings quietly from his phone and checked the activation history. User 03 had been added 19 days earlier at 11:42 p.m. while Isaiah was supervising overnight dock repairs on the east side of Houston. The realization settled coldly into his chest. Someone created private access to his house during one of the exact shifts Monique complained kept him married to work. Upstairs, a drawer shut abruptly inside the bedroom. Isaiah locked his phone and walked in calmly. Monique sat at the vanity removing makeup with practiced casualness while soft jazz played low from her phone speaker. Her body language looked almost too relaxed now. Overcorrected. "You coming to bed?" she asked without turning around. Isaiah removed his watch slowly and placed it beside the dresser. "What happened to the old security settings?" he asked evenly. The makeup wipe paused in her hand for less than a second. The security company updated some things. They added guest access. Monique finally looked at him through the mirror. "Marcus needed temporary entry one day for a staging consultation while I was out." There it was again. Marcus. Comfortable enough to require house access. Isaiah nodded once like the answer made sense. But freight supervisors survive by recognizing timing inconsistencies faster than excuses. Earlier she said Marcus stopped by for dinner with Tasha and her husband. Now he apparently needed daytime access alone inside the house for staging work. Different explanations. Same man. Isaiah changed clothes quietly while Monique kept talking about real estate clients and luxury listings as if normal conversation could smooth over structural cracks already forming underneath them. The next morning began before sunrise. Isaiah sat alone at the kitchen counter drinking black coffee while freight schedules glowed across his tablet screen beside payroll reports and route adjustments. Through the windows, suburban streetlights reflected against wet pavement outside. Monique came downstairs dressed sharply for a client brunch in cream slacks and a fitted black coat that looked more expensive than anything she used to buy. Isaiah noticed the designer label immediately when she grabbed her purse. "New. You got meetings all day?" he asked casually. "Probably." She avoided direct eye contact while checking notifications on her phone. Her screen lit briefly in the reflection of the microwave door. Marcus Vale. Incoming call. She silenced it instantly. "You've been getting a lot of business lately," Isaiah said. Monique forced a faint smile. "That's usually how careers work." The response carried edge now. Defensive before accusation even existed. Isaiah watched her leave through the front windows before opening the joint household account dashboard from his tablet. Several recent charges immediately stood out. Upscale restaurants downtown. Boutique hotel valet fees. Luxury furniture deposits. Not catastrophic spending, but strategic spending. Hidden inside normal household flow carefully enough most exhausted husbands would never notice. Isaiah exported the statement silently into a private folder. By noon, he sat inside the freight operations tower overlooking loading docks while 18-wheelers moved through gray rain beneath him. Warehouse radios crackled softly in the background as dispatch managers argued over rerouted shipments. Isaiah's phone vibrated once against the desk. Home security alert, garage access opened, user 03. Isaiah checked the timestamp immediately. Monique had texted him less than 4 minutes earlier claiming she was still downtown with clients. His eyes drifted toward the live driveway camera feed. A black SUV slowly rolled into his garage. Marcus stepped out holding a leather overnight bag. Not rushed. Not hiding. Like someone arriving somewhere familiar. Isaiah leaned back slowly in his chair while rain hammered the warehouse windows behind him. Then the camera angle shifted just enough for him to catch something else inside the SUV before the garage door closed completely. Hanging beside Marcus's jacket was a laminated visitor parking pass from Isaiah's own freight company headquarters. Isaiah stared at the paused security image on his office monitor while freight radios crackled through the operations tower behind him. Marcus Vale's black SUV sat halfway inside his garage like it belonged there. But it wasn't the overnight bag that held Isaiah's attention anymore. It was the laminated visitor pass hanging from the rearview mirror. Turner Freight Regional Access, Executive Lot B. Isaiah leaned closer slowly. The pass color had changed 6 months ago after a corporate security update. Which meant Marcus had been inside Isaiah's company recently enough to receive a current authorization badge. Not random access. Approved access. Isaiah's eyes narrowed slightly as 18-wheelers rolled through rain outside the warehouse windows below. Monique had never once mentioned Marcus visiting company property. More importantly, freight headquarters wasn't somewhere people casually walked into without sponsorship. Somebody inside Isaiah's professional world knew him. Maybe several people did. By the time Isaiah drove home that evening, exhaustion had transformed into something colder and more focused. The house sat quiet beneath gray skies and wet oak trees swaying against the suburban streetlights. Inside, Monique stood barefoot in the kitchen preparing salmon while low jazz drifted softly through ceiling speakers. Everything looked normal at first glance. But normal now felt rehearsed. "You're home earlier than usual," she said without turning fully around. Isaiah loosened his work tie slowly. "Storm rerouted shipments again." Monique nodded while checking a notification on her phone near the stove. She angled the screen away automatically before locking it. Reflex. Practiced. Isaiah noticed another detail immediately too. The expensive sports coat from yesterday was gone. So was the Rolex charger. Evidence cleaned quietly overnight. If you walked into your own house and started realizing someone else had become comfortable enough to leave things behind there, how long before you'd stop feeling like the house belonged to you too? During dinner, Monique barely touched her food. Her attention drifted constantly toward her phone screen lighting beside the water glass. Isaiah remained calm, eating slowly while mentally reconstructing timelines. "You still working Saturday?" Monique asked carefully. "Probably overnight." The answer came too quickly from her afterward. "That's good." Silence settled heavily between them after she realized what she'd said. Isaiah looked up slowly. Monique forced a laugh. "I mean good for overtime." But the damage already existed. Isaiah noticed she no longer asked when he'd be home. Only when he'd be gone. Later that night, after Monique fell asleep, Isaiah sat alone in the downstairs office reviewing archived company access logs from his secured employee portal. Rain moved softly against the dark windows while blue monitor light reflected across his tired face. He searched Marcus Vale's name once. No direct results. Then Isaiah checked executive visitor sponsorship records instead. His expression hardened slightly almost immediately. The authorization request for Marcus's parking pass had been approved under Monique Turner's corporate guest credentials 3 months earlier. 3 months. Isaiah stared silently at the screen. Monique had only visited Freight headquarters twice publicly in the last year for company holiday events. Meaning she deliberately requested executive-level visitor access for Marcus outside normal business functions. The implication settled deeper than the affair itself somehow. Coordination. Overlap between his marriage and his professional life. Structural intrusion. Then another detail appeared beneath the visitor authorization timestamp. Escort clearance level, executive floor access granted. Isaiah leaned back slowly in his chair. Executive floor access included financial offices, regional operations records, contract review departments, and executive conference suites. Marcus hadn't just entered Isaiah's company parking garage. He'd been escorted deep enough inside the building to access areas tied to contracts, payroll structures, and corporate operations. Isaiah's phone vibrated suddenly against the desk, breaking the silence. Denise. His older sister rarely called after midnight. "You awake?" she asked immediately after he answered. "Yeah." A pause followed. "Isaiah. I didn't want to say anything before because I wasn't sure." His grip tightened slightly around the phone. "Say what?" Denise lowered her voice. "I saw Monique downtown last month with another man." Isaiah closed his eyes briefly but said nothing. "At first I thought it was business," Denise continued carefully. "But they were coming out of a courthouse building together." Courthouse. Not restaurant. Not hotel. Courthouse. Rain tapped harder against the office windows while Isaiah stared at the glowing visitor authorization still open on his monitor. Then Denise added the sentence that changed the entire shape of the situation instantly. "And Isaiah, they weren't alone. There was a lawyer with them." Isaiah remained seated in the downstairs office long after Denise ended the call. Rain rolled steadily across the dark windows while the freight access authorization still glowed on his monitor beside the courthouse implication now echoing through his head. Monique. Marcus. Lawyer. Courthouse building. None of it fit inside the explanation of a simple affair anymore. Affairs lived in secrecy and impulse. This felt scheduled. Structured. Isaiah opened a second encrypted company browser and quietly searched commercial property litigation records connected to Marcus Vale. Several development filings appeared immediately across Harris County databases. Rezoning disputes. Financing negotiations. Partnership structures. Isaiah scanned the dates carefully while warehouse lights from the freight yard flickered through the rain outside. Then he noticed something that made him stop scrolling entirely. One of Marcus's largest pending development acquisitions sat less than 4 miles from Turner Freight's newest expansion corridor. Same district Isaiah's company planned to acquire logistics access rights through within the next fiscal quarter. The overlap felt too precise to ignore. The next morning, Monique behaved almost unusually affectionate. She kissed Isaiah goodbye before work. Asked whether he'd slept enough. Offered to reschedule her evening plan so they could finally spend time together. The performance itself became another clue. People only adjusted behavior after sensing pressure nearby. Isaiah watched her carefully while she moved through the kitchen in cream-colored heels and soft perfume that now smelled less comforting than strategic. "You still buried at the warehouse this weekend?" she asked casually while pouring coffee. Isaiah nodded once. "Probably overnight Saturday too." Relief flickered through her expression before disappearing behind a smile. Tiny. Fast. But real. Isaiah looked down at his untouched coffee afterward, quietly replaying every recent conversation where Monique seemed more interested in his absence than his presence. By noon, Isaiah sat inside a private conference room at Turner Freight headquarters reviewing land acquisition proposals with regional executives. Massive logistics maps covered the wall screens while rain darkened the downtown skyline beyond the glass. Halfway through the meeting, one executive casually referenced Marcus Vail by name during a development update. Isaiah kept his expression neutral immediately. Vail's group still trying to secure those East Corridor commercial parcels, another executive asked. Yeah, the vice president answered. Smart operator too. Been courting transportation partnerships aggressively. Courting transportation partnerships. Isaiah remained silent while connecting timelines internally. Marcus didn't just know Monique. Marcus had positioned himself around Isaiah's industry months ago. Possibly longer. Then another executive added something else casually while flipping through paperwork. Funny thing is, Vail already toured our executive logistics floor earlier this year through some outside introduction. Isaiah's eyes lifted slowly. Who sponsored the visit? The executive checked a digital note briefly. Believe it came through family access or spouse referral. Silence settled heavily inside Isaiah's chest after that. Family access. Not business networking. Personal proximity. The boundaries between Isaiah's marriage, finances, and professional infrastructure were disappearing one layer at a time. That evening, Isaiah parked quietly across the street from his own house instead of pulling directly into the driveway. The storm had finally weakened into soft drizzle while warm suburban lights reflected against wet pavement. At 8:43 p.m., a black SUV rolled slowly into his neighborhood and stopped 2 houses down before cutting headlights. Marcus stepped out wearing a dark overcoat and carrying no overnight bag this time. He entered Isaiah's house through the side garage code without knocking once. No hesitation. No waiting. Like routine. Isaiah checked the timestamp automatically. Monique had texted him 11 minutes earlier asking whether his shift might run another few hours. His jaw tightened slightly for the first time all week. Not from jealousy anymore. From clarity. Because now the pattern looked larger than betrayal itself. Access codes. Corporate entry permissions. Courthouse meetings. Financial overlaps. Coordinated schedules. Marcus wasn't behaving like someone sneaking into another man's marriage. He was moving like someone already being integrated into Isaiah's replacement. Then Isaiah noticed one final detail through the rain-covered windshield that made his pulse slow dangerously instead of rise. Upstairs in the master bedroom window, Monique pulled the curtains closed immediately after Marcus entered the house. But not before Isaiah saw a second silhouette already standing inside the room waiting with them. Isaiah remained parked across the street long after the upstairs curtains closed. Rain moved softly across the windshield while the second silhouette replayed over and over in his head. Not Marcus. Taller. Older posture. Controlled movements. Whoever stood inside that bedroom had not reacted like someone hiding from discovery. The figure stayed near the window calmly before the curtains sealed shut. Isaiah checked the driveway camera feed again from his phone. Marcus entered at 8:43 p.m. Monique texted him at 8:32 asking if he would probably be stuck all night. 11-minute buffer. Coordinated timing. But the second silhouette changed the shape of the entire situation. Affairs didn't usually involve additional people standing comfortably inside another man's bedroom. Not unless the room itself had become part of something larger. Isaiah drove away slowly without turning on the radio once. The next morning, Isaiah arrived at Turner Freight headquarters before sunrise and accessed archived visitor logs from an executive security terminal most department managers didn't even know existed. Cold fluorescent lights reflected across empty hallways while overnight dispatch teams rotated shifts downstairs beneath the warehouse floors. Isaiah filtered every external visitor connected to Monique's authorization credentials over the last 6 months. Marcus Vail appeared 9 separate times. But another name surfaced repeatedly beside him too. Nathan Crowley. Corporate litigation consultant. Isaiah frowned slightly at the title. Crowley had visited the executive legal floor more than Marcus himself. Even stranger, several visits happened on weekends when most corporate departments were closed entirely. Isaiah opened one of the archived escort records carefully. Purpose of visit, strategic asset review coordination. His jaw tightened almost invisibly. Asset review. Coordination. Legal access. None of those phrases belonged anywhere near his marriage. Around noon, Isaiah sat silently inside a downtown steakhouse during a logistics investment lunch with regional partners. Through the restaurant's glass walls, Houston traffic rolled beneath gray skies while soft jazz played overhead. Halfway through the meeting, one investor casually referenced Marcus Vail during a commercial corridor discussion. Marcus has been pushing hard for East Corridor expansion lately, the investor muttered while cutting into a steak. Guy suddenly acts like he already knows freight zoning approvals before they happen. Isaiah kept eating slowly without reacting outwardly. How? Another executive asked. The investor shrugged. Connections probably. Somebody inside transportation infrastructure maybe. Isaiah stared quietly at the untouched bourbon beside his plate afterward. Marcus wasn't just connected socially anymore. He appeared positioned around future freight expansion information tied directly to Isaiah's industry. Then another realization settled into place. Monique's recent obsession with Isaiah's overtime schedules suddenly looked less emotional too. The longer Isaiah stayed physically absent, the more operational freedom existed around his house, his routines, and possibly even his professional world. That evening, Isaiah stopped by Denise's hospital office unexpectedly after work. Rain hammered against the parking structure windows while late-night nurses moved through dim corridors carrying charts beneath fluorescent lights. Denise closed her office door immediately after seeing his face. "You found something," she said quietly. Isaiah leaned against the wall with both hands in his coat pockets. "The man you saw with Monique outside the courthouse, was there another person?" Denise hesitated. "White guy. Late 50s maybe. Expensive suit. Briefcase. Attorney profile." Isaiah nodded once slowly. "Did Monique see you?" "No," Denise studied him carefully afterward. "Isaiah, this doesn't feel like cheating anymore." He didn't answer immediately because he had already reached the same conclusion hours ago. By midnight, Isaiah sat alone in the downstairs office again while security camera footage replayed silently across multiple monitors. Marcus entering. Monique timing messages. Corporate access logs. Weekend legal visits. Financial charges. Executive floor permissions. Patterns were starting to overlap too perfectly now. Then Isaiah noticed something buried inside one archived security timestamp that made his pulse slow completely. 3 weeks before he ever saw the black SUV outside his house, Nathan Crowley's legal access badge had been used inside Turner Freight's executive records department at 11:17 p.m. during one of Isaiah's overnight emergency route shifts. Accessed files, executive compensation structures, regional operations division. Isaiah stared at the glowing words in silence while rain struck the windows harder outside. Because suddenly the hidden system around him no longer looked emotional at all. It looked financial. Strategic. And terrifyingly patient. Isaiah stared at the glowing access log long after midnight while rain battered the office windows hard enough to blur the freight yard lights outside into streaks of silver and amber. Executive compensation structures, regional operations division. Accessed by a litigation consultant tied to Marcus Vail weeks before Isaiah ever suspected Monique was cheating. That detail changed everything. Affairs happened in emotion. This felt procedural. Isaiah leaned back slowly in the leather chair while multiple screens reflected across his face in shifting blue light. Then another realization settled into place quietly enough to feel dangerous. Whoever built this system around him understood his schedule first. His exhaustion. His predictability. His absence. If you've ever looked back and realized people may have been studying your routines long before you knew you were vulnerable, then you already understand how cold that realization feels. The next morning, Isaiah called Elliot Price for the first time in nearly 6 months. Elliot had managed portions of Isaiah's long-term investment structures since Isaiah quietly began acquiring logistics-linked commercial properties years earlier. They met inside a private breakfast lounge attached to a downtown hotel where muted jazz drifted beneath low lighting and expensive silence. Elliot frowned immediately after Isaiah slid printed access logs across the table. Why would a litigation consultant need executive compensation visibility? He asked carefully. Isaiah stirred untouched coffee once before answering. That's what I'm trying to understand. Elliot reviewed the documents longer this time. Isaiah, these aren't random information pulls. He tapped the timestamps softly. This looks like someone building leverage models. Leverage models. The phrase stayed with Isaiah as rain rolled down the dark windows behind them. Financial projections. Asset exposure. Divorce positioning. Strategic separation. Suddenly the courthouse meetings Monique attended with Marcus no longer felt personal at all. They felt operational. By late afternoon, Isaiah sat alone inside his office at Turner Freight reviewing old financial archives he hadn't opened in years. Hidden inside several secured folders sat documents connected to property partnerships and inherited holdings his father transferred quietly before his death. Monique knew Isaiah made good money. She did not know how much of his actual wealth existed outside visible salary structures. Isaiah always preferred stability over display. Smaller house than he could afford. Same truck for 7 years. No flashy investments. No social media performance. Most people around him assumed he was simply another exhausted operations manager trading health for overtime. That assumption suddenly looked useful. Isaiah opened another archive trust document and froze slightly after noticing something unexpected buried inside the ownership language. Certain inherited freight corridor holdings connected directly to the same East Corridor development Marcus Vail had been aggressively pursuing. Which meant Marcus's interest in Turner Freight infrastructure may not have started with Monique at all. It may have started with land access and financial positioning years earlier. Around 7:30 p.m., Monique texted asking if Isaiah would be home late again. Isaiah replied yes immediately even though he had already left the warehouse. Instead of driving home, he parked outside a downtown office tower where Marcus's development company occupied 3 executive floors near the top. Through rain-covered glass, late-night lights still glowed inside several offices. Black SUVs lined the private garage entrance while suited employees moved through the lobby carrying legal folders and coffee trays. Isaiah watched quietly from across the street for nearly 20 minutes before recognizing Nathan Crowley exiting the building beside Marcus himself. They weren't laughing or celebrating. They looked tense. Focused. Then Monique appeared moments later stepping out from a private side elevator entrance wearing the same cream-colored coat she claimed she wore all day with clients. Marcus handed her a thick black folder before she entered her own car separately. No physical affection. No romance. Just coordination. Structured movement. Isaiah's jaw tightened slightly as the rain intensified again. Then one final detail shifted the scale of everything permanently. Before leaving the tower, Nathan Crowley stopped beneath the lobby awning long enough for Isaiah to clearly see the gold lettering stamped across the black folder Monique now carried into her car. Turner Marital Asset Review. Isaiah did not drive home immediately after seeing the black folder in Monique's hands. He stayed parked across the street from the downtown tower while rain slid slowly down the windshield and the city lights blurred across wet glass. Turner Marital Asset Review. The words replayed in his head with a cold precision that no longer felt emotional. Somebody had already converted his marriage into documentation, projections, and legal positioning. Isaiah rested one hand against the steering wheel while quietly reconstructing timelines. Marcus enters the house comfortably. Nathan Crowley accesses executive compensation records. Monique schedules courthouse meetings during Isaiah's overnight freight shifts. None of them behaved like people improvising. They behaved like people following stages inside a process already mapped out months earlier. But for the first time since this began, Isaiah felt something besides suspicion settling into place. Structure. Which meant systems could also be broken. The following week, Isaiah changed nothing outwardly. Same overtime schedules. Same calm voice. Same exhausted husband routine everyone expected him to maintain. At home, Monique grew noticeably lighter around him now, almost relieved. She talked more freely about luxury developments and social events while checking her phone openly at the dinner table. Confidence had started replacing caution. Isaiah noticed it immediately. Overconfidence always created movement. And movement exposed patterns. One Thursday evening, Monique casually mentioned attending a private networking dinner downtown hosted by Marcus's development group. "You probably wouldn't enjoy it," she added while adjusting an earring in the hallway mirror. "Mostly investors and commercial real estate people." Isaiah nodded while buttoning his work jacket slowly. "You should still go." The answer visibly surprised her. Tiny hesitation. Then relief again. She kissed his cheek lightly before leaving in heels that echoed softly across the hardwood floor. Isaiah watched the front door close before quietly opening the downstairs office safe built into the wall behind old freight records. Inside sat several sealed folders Monique had never seen before. Property trusts. Corridor ownership structures. Silent holdings connected to inherited freight access land his father transferred years earlier through layered partnerships Elliot helped establish quietly. Isaiah reviewed one particular file under the glow of the desk lamp while rain tapped against the windows behind him. East Corridor Holdings Consortium. Marcus had spent months trying to acquire development rights near that corridor without realizing Isaiah already controlled leverage hidden beneath intermediary structures. Isaiah closed the folder slowly. Suddenly Marcus's growing interest in Turner Freight infrastructure looked less accidental than opportunistic. By 9:40 p.m., Isaiah arrived quietly at the private hotel hosting the networking dinner. He didn't enter the ballroom immediately. Instead he remained upstairs overlooking the event through a glass mezzanine near the silent elevators while guests moved beneath crystal chandeliers carrying bourbon glasses and polished conversations through soft jazz lighting. Monique stood beside Marcus near the center of the room laughing with investors Isaiah recognized from freight expansion meetings. Different body language tonight. Public familiarity. No effort to maintain distance anymore. Then Isaiah noticed Nathan Crowley speaking privately with two men near the back wall beside a projected development map of East Corridor commercial properties. One of the highlighted acquisition sectors sat directly over logistics access land secretly tied to Isaiah's holding structures. His eyes narrowed slightly. They weren't just preparing for divorce positioning anymore. They were planning around assumptions about Isaiah's future financial exposure. About what he would lose. About what would become accessible after separation. Isaiah remained perfectly still above the ballroom while the scale of the system underneath his marriage finally became visible. Then something else happened that shifted the balance quietly for the first time. One of the older investors downstairs suddenly noticed Isaiah standing on the mezzanine. The man's entire posture changed immediately. Respect. Recognition. He crossed the ballroom floor almost instantly and shook Isaiah's hand firmly enough that several nearby conversations stopped mid-sentence. Marcus turned at the exact moment the investor smiled broadly and said words Monique clearly never expected to hear in that room. Isaiah Turner. The smartest logistics acquisition strategist in Houston. Silence spread subtly across the surrounding cluster of executives afterward while Marcus's expression tightened almost invisibly for the first time. But Isaiah barely reacted. because his attention had already shifted toward the folder tucked beneath Nathan Crowley's arm near the back of the ballroom. A red legal tab now protruded visibly from the side. Preliminary spousal claim structures. Isaiah never approached Marcus at the networking dinner. He never interrupted Monique. Never reacted to the investor publicly recognizing him in front of the ballroom crowd. That restraint became its own kind of pressure. From the mezzanine above, Isaiah simply shook hands, exchanged a few quiet words about freight corridor acquisitions, then disappeared before anyone could study his expression too closely. But downstairs, the atmosphere had already shifted. Marcus noticed it first. Small changes in posture. Investors suddenly asking Isaiah direct questions instead of dismissing him as another overworked operations supervisor. Monique noticed it second. The confusion behind her eyes lingered even after Isaiah left the hotel. Because for the first time since this started, she had seen other powerful people respond to her husband with visible respect she clearly didn't fully understand. By sunrise, Isaiah sat alone inside a secured conference office at Turner Freight reviewing ownership structures Elliot quietly transferred onto the screen beside him. Rain drifted softly against the glass walls overlooking downtown Houston while empty executive floors remained dark around them. Elliot adjusted his glasses and lowered his voice carefully. Marcus thinks your wealth exposure comes through salary, bonus structures, and visible marital assets. Isaiah remained silent. Elliot tapped another document. But these corridor holdings your father transferred years ago, they were insulated through separate inheritance protections before your marriage even stabilized financially. Isaiah studied the layered trust structures calmly. Most people around him always assumed he worked 80-hour weeks because he had no other options. In reality, Isaiah kept working because freight operations gave him control, discipline, and leverage. Quiet men were rarely studied closely unless they performed wealth publicly. Marcus had underestimated that completely. Later that afternoon, Isaiah returned home earlier than expected for the first time in weeks. The house sat unusually silent beneath gray skies while soft instrumental music played from hidden ceiling speakers. Monique froze slightly when she saw him step into the kitchen. "You're home," she said carefully. Isaiah removed his coat slowly. "Board meetings got moved." Her reaction came half a second too late again. Tiny disappointment beneath forced warmth. Isaiah noticed an open folder resting near the kitchen island before Monique closed it quickly. But not fast enough. He caught enough words upside down across the page to recognize legal formatting immediately. Community Property Exposure Assessment. Monique slid the folder casually into her designer tote bag afterward. "Client paperwork," she explained too smoothly. Isaiah nodded once and poured himself coffee without asking another question. Emotional control had started unsettling her more than anger would have. That night, Isaiah quietly accessed another archive Elliot recently restored from older property acquisitions connected to his father's estate. Most of the documents involved freight access easements and dormant logistics corridors investors overlooked years earlier. But one hidden attachment stopped him cold. Marcus Vale Development Group had already attempted to acquire partial rights tied to those same holdings 18 months ago through shell entities. 18 months. Long before Monique's sudden emotional distance became obvious. Isaiah leaned back slowly while city lights glowed beyond the office windows. The timeline changed everything. Marcus may not have entered Isaiah's life through the affair. The affair may have become the access point into something Marcus wanted long before Monique herself fully understood the board she stepped onto. Around midnight, Isaiah received an encrypted message from Elliot containing one final document flagged urgent. Attached was a confidential preliminary filing draft never officially submitted to court. Petition for marital discovery and asset freeze review. Isaiah read the filing silently while rain tapped harder against the glass. Several listed holdings appeared accurate. But the largest protected corridor trusts were missing completely. Which meant Marcus and Crowley still believed Isaiah's true leverage remained exposed and reachable through divorce positioning. Isaiah closed the file slowly, his expression calm for the first time in days. Because now he understood something dangerous. The people quietly preparing to dismantle his life still had absolutely no idea how much of it they had never actually seen. The house had become quieter in ways Isaiah no longer trusted. Monique moved through rooms now with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. She stopped hiding certain things entirely. Luxury shopping bags appeared openly near the bedroom closet. Late-night, client dinners became normal. Marcus's name surfaced naturally in conversation without hesitation anymore, usually disguised inside real estate updates or investment gossip. Isaiah noticed all of it while saying almost nothing. That silence started changing the balance more than arguments ever could. Because people became careless around men they considered emotionally defeated. 3 days later, Isaiah sat inside a private conference room overlooking downtown Houston while Elliot reviewed trust transfer documents across a polished black table beneath soft recessed lighting. Rain rolled down the glass walls behind them while freight traffic moved far below through wet streets. If they move forward with asset freeze positioning, Elliot said quietly, they're expecting visible exposure. Salary. Joint property. Liquid accounts. Isaiah studied the paperwork calmly. And the corridor trusts. Elliot slid another folder across slowly. Untouchable under inheritance protections unless you voluntarily restructure access. Isaiah nodded once. Most people around him believed his life existed inside overtime checks and operational bonuses because that was all he allowed them to see. But Isaiah's father built freight leverage differently. Quietly. Through land. Through routes. Through access. Marcus had spent months trying to position himself around systems Isaiah already partially controlled without ever realizing it. If you've ever watched someone build confidence around assumptions that weren't actually true, then you already know how dangerous patience can become. That evening, Monique invited Isaiah to a luxury charity gala hosted at a downtown hotel ballroom tied to Marcus's development group. The invitation itself felt strategic. Public optics. Wealth circles. Social positioning. Isaiah accepted immediately. The surprise on Monique's face lasted only a second before she smiled again. At the gala, crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors while Houston executives drifted between champagne tables beneath low orchestral music. Isaiah arrived in a charcoal-tailored suit that shifted the atmosphere almost immediately. Not flashy. But precise. Expensive in the understated way powerful men recognized instantly. Several investors greeted him before Monique even finished introducing him to nearby guests. Isaiah noticed Marcus watching the interactions carefully from across the ballroom beside Nathan Crowley. Small tension entered Marcus's posture for the first time. Then came the subtle humiliation attempt. During a conversation near the investor tables, Marcus laughed lightly and placed one hand on Isaiah's shoulder. "Man, I still don't know how you survive those warehouse hours," he said loudly enough for surrounding executives to hear. "Couldn't be me." Several people smiled politely. The implication sat underneath the comment clearly enough. Blue-collar exhaustion. Lower status. Operational labor beneath executive sophistication. Isaiah held Marcus's gaze calmly before answering. Infrastructure usually matters more than appearances once money starts moving. Silence followed just long enough to shift the energy nearby. One older investor glanced toward Isaiah differently afterward. Marcus smiled again, but less comfortably this time. Later that night, Isaiah stepped briefly onto a private terrace overlooking rain-soaked city lights while the ballroom noise softened behind glass doors. He checked his phone once. Elliot had forwarded another confidential filing update from inside Crowley's office. Preliminary marital discovery strategy, anticipated high-value exposure events. Isaiah scanned the attached notes carefully beneath the glow of the skyline. Marcus and Crowley were preparing around one central assumption, that Isaiah's largest leverage structures would eventually become visible during divorce discovery proceedings. Which meant they still believed the real game had not started yet. Then Isaiah noticed something buried near the end of the document that made his expression finally harden slightly. One scheduled strategy meeting next week listed a private attendee Isaiah had not seen connected before tonight. Valerie Denton, Senior Acquisitions Counsel, East Corridor Expansion Authority. Isaiah stared out across the rain-covered skyline afterward while the realization settled slowly into place. The system surrounding his marriage was no longer limited to Monique, Marcus, or one aggressive attorney. Corporate acquisition interests were now attached to it too. And somewhere inside that growing structure, people were already making decisions based on what they expected Isaiah Turner to lose. By the following Monday, the pressure surrounding Isaiah no longer felt hidden. It moved openly now through conference rooms, phone calls, social events, and carefully staged conversations that all seemed designed to push him toward one assumption, that his life was already collapsing and he simply hadn't accepted it yet. At home, Monique stopped pretending emotional distance was temporary. She stayed out later. Took calls privately on the upstairs balcony. Spoke about future plans without naturally including Isaiah anymore. Even her language had changed. My schedule. My opportunities. My contacts. Isaiah noticed every shift while maintaining the exact same calm routine. Same work hours. Same quiet tone. Same disciplined stillness that everyone around him continued mistaking for exhaustion instead of control. 3 days later, Isaiah arrived at Turner Freight headquarters before sunrise for a closed executive meeting regarding East Corridor transportation acquisitions. Rain hammered softly against the dark windows while security monitors glowed across the silent boardroom walls. Halfway through the meeting, Valerie Denton entered alongside 2 acquisition attorneys carrying confidential infrastructure binders. Isaiah remained expressionless immediately. So this was how deep the overlap had become. Valerie spoke smoothly about strategic partnerships, future zoning leverage, and commercial development coordination. But Isaiah noticed one contradiction instantly. Several projected corridor maps already highlighted freight access parcels connected to protected holdings that were never supposed to appear publicly. Meaning someone inside the broader acquisition structure believed those assets would soon become reachable. Exposed. Transferable. Isaiah sat back quietly while executives debated logistics projections around him. Nobody in that room realized the land structures they discussed were already partially controlled through trusts carrying Isaiah's family name beneath intermediary ownership layers. The pressure intensified that evening during a private investor dinner hosted inside a luxury hotel restaurant overlooking downtown Houston. Marcus sat across from Isaiah at the center table while investors, attorneys, and development executives drifted through soft piano music beneath amber lighting. Monique arrived late wearing a black silk dress Isaiah had never seen before. Marcus stood automatically when she approached. Familiarity. Comfort. Public confidence. Nobody at the table seemed concerned about appearances anymore. During dinner, Marcus subtly steered conversation toward work-life imbalance and men who sacrifice too much for companies that replace them anyway. Several people laughed lightly. The implication landed exactly where intended. Isaiah simply sipped bourbon once before answering calmly. Depends who actually owns the infrastructure beneath the company. Silence followed. Tiny. Sharp. Enough to make 2 investors glance toward him differently. Marcus smiled afterward, but his eyes stayed fixed on Isaiah longer than before. The balance was shifting now, even if nobody fully understood why yet. Around midnight, Isaiah drove alone through rain-soaked streets toward a secured storage property Elliott had quietly maintained outside Houston for years. The facility sat isolated behind gated fencing and industrial floodlights humming against the storm. Elliott waited inside beside several sealed archive boxes stacked across a steel table. I found something buried in your father's older transfer records, Elliott said quietly. Isaiah removed his gloves slowly while Elliott slid forward a thick binder marked East Corridor Infrastructure Easement Authority, Original Acquisition Rights. Isaiah opened the file carefully beneath fluorescent light. The first pages contained old partnership agreements tied to dormant freight access routes. But deeper inside sat something far more dangerous. One signature appeared repeatedly across early acquisition negotiations connected to Marcus's current expansion plans. Isaiah stared at the name in silence while rain echoed against the metal roof overhead. Harold Vale. Marcus's father. The dates attached to the document stretched back nearly 15 years, long before Marcus ever met Monique. Long before the affair. Long before Isaiah believed his marriage had even begun changing. Elliot watched Isaiah carefully across the table. "You understand what this means now, right?" Isaiah closed the binder slowly while the realization settled colder than anything before it. Marcus Vale's interest in Isaiah's life may never have started with Monique at all. The marriage itself might have become part of a much older financial strategy tied to land, access, and generational leverage Isaiah inherited without fully realizing who else had been circling it for years. Then Isaiah noticed one final document clipped inside the back folder pocket. Emergency preliminary injunction filing, scheduled submission pending Thursday morning. Thursday morning arrived beneath hard gray rain and courthouse-colored skies that made downtown Houston feel colder than usual. Isaiah stood inside a quiet conference corridor outside a private mediation chamber wearing the same controlled expression he carried through freight negotiations and overnight crisis calls for years. Across the hall, Monique sat beside Marcus and Nathan Crowley beneath soft recessed lighting, her posture polished but increasingly tense beneath the calm surface she kept trying to maintain. Marcus looked comfortable. Confident. Like a man already imagining the next version of his life after this meeting finished. Nathan reviewed folders steadily while attorneys and clerks moved through the marble hallway carrying sealed files and untouched coffee cups. Isaiah noticed one detail immediately though. Valerie Denton had arrived too. East Corridor Expansion Authority. Corporate acquisitions now physically sitting inside marital proceedings. The overlap was no longer hidden at all. Inside the mediation room, polished wood tables reflected muted light while rain struck the tall windows overlooking the city. Crowley began smoothly, presenting financial exposure summaries, marital asset assumptions, projected evaluations, and preliminary injunction positioning tied to Isaiah's visible holdings. The language sounded practiced. Structured. Prepared long before today. Monique barely looked toward Isaiah while the documents moved across the table. Then Crowley referenced East Corridor acquisition exposure tied to anticipated transferable logistics interests. That was the moment Isaiah finally understood how far the assumptions around him had spread. They weren't preparing around what he owned. They were preparing around what they believed would soon become accessible after destabilizing him emotionally, legally, and financially. Isaiah remained silent until the mediator finally asked whether he intended to contest the preliminary exposure framework. Only then did he slide a thin black folder quietly across the table toward his attorney. The room changed almost immediately. His attorney opened the folder calmly before placing several notarized trust structures and inheritance protections beside the mediation summary. Elliot sat quietly near the back wall watching without expression while Crowley's confident posture shifted for the first time all morning. These holdings, Isaiah's attorney said evenly, were protected through premarital inheritance structures years before any marital commingling claims. Silence spread slowly across the room afterward. Valerie Denton leaned forward slightly. Marcus stopped moving entirely. Monique looked confused at first. Then unsettled. Because the freight corridor properties tied to East Corridor leverage suddenly no longer sat inside reachable marital exposure. They sat behind protected family structures nobody in their strategy calculations fully accounted for. Crowley recovered quickly, flipping through paperwork faster now. There are still operational compensation reviews. Operational salary isn't the leverage structure, Isaiah's attorney interrupted calmly. Another document slid across the table. Original acquisition easements. Legacy corridor rights. Historical land protections connected to Isaiah's father. Marcus stared at the signatures in silence before color slowly disappeared from his face. Harold Vale's name appeared repeatedly across acquisition negotiations from 15 years earlier. Old leverage. Failed attempts. Generational positioning. Marcus finally understood what Isaiah realized days ago: the land his father's development interests chased for years had partially transferred into Isaiah's family holdings long before Marcus ever entered his marriage. Monique looked between them now with visible confusion turning rapidly into panic. The affair she thought centered around emotional dissatisfaction suddenly sat inside something much larger and far older than she ever understood. Then another shock landed quietly across the table. Isaiah's attorney produced timestamped access records from Turner Freight Executive Systems showing unauthorized compensation reviews tied to Nathan Crowley's credentials before legal disclosure proceedings officially existed. The mediator's expression hardened immediately. These accesses occurred prior to formal filing authorization. Crowley didn't answer right away. That hesitation damaged everything more than words could have. Across the room, Marcus finally lost composure for the first time. "This is getting blown out of proportion," he snapped sharply. But nobody in the room looked at him the same way anymore. The social atmosphere had already shifted. Executives. Attorneys. Mediators. Everyone suddenly understood Isaiah Turner was not an exhausted husband stumbling blindly into divorce. He was the quiet holder of leverage structures powerful people had underestimated because they mistook discipline and restraint for weakness. Then Isaiah noticed Monique staring at him differently now too. Not angry. Not defensive. Afraid. Because for the first time since this began, she realized she may never have actually understood the man she married at all. And when Crowley's phone vibrated moments later with an urgent financing alert tied to Marcus's East Corridor Development Group, Marcus checked the screen once before his entire expression collapsed silently. The mediation room never fully recovered after Marcus checked his phone. Isaiah watched the collapse happen in layers instead of explosions. First came the silence. Then shifting posture. Then the subtle panic people tried hiding once they realized the assumptions carrying an entire strategy had just broken underneath them. Marcus stared at the financing alert longer than necessary before lowering the phone slowly onto the polished conference table. Nathan Crowley immediately leaned toward him, voice lowered, but Isaiah noticed the tension instantly. Controlled men only whispered like that when damage was already spreading beyond the room. Rain slid against the courthouse windows while nobody touched the coffee growing cold beside stacks of legal paperwork. Across the table, Monique looked between Marcus, Crowley, and the inheritance documents again as if she still expected someone to explain how the situation changed this fast. But the truth had already become visible. She built her future around a version of Isaiah that never actually existed. The mediator resumed carefully, requesting clarification regarding unauthorized executive access reviews and acquisition overlap disclosures. Crowley attempted recovery first. There may have been misunderstandings involving exploratory financial modeling. Exploratory? Isaiah's attorney interrupted calmly while sliding another document forward. Timestamped freight access records. Security footage authorization requests. Preliminary marital exposure drafts dated before official filings. The room shifted colder immediately. Valerie Denton stopped taking notes altogether now. Her expression tightened while reviewing the documents connected to East Corridor acquisition assumptions. Because if litigation consultants and development interests used unauthorized internal financial reviews tied to future marital positioning, then this no longer looked aggressive. It looked compromised. Marcus finally spoke again, but his confidence sounded thinner now. This is still a private marital issue. Isaiah remained silent while the mediator looked directly at Crowley instead. Not if corporate acquisition leverage and protected inheritance structures were accessed improperly before disclosure authorization. Nobody answered immediately after that. And in the silence, Isaiah noticed something almost worse than panic spreading through Monique's expression. Recognition. Real recognition. She was finally starting to understand the scale of what she attached herself to without fully seeing it. By late afternoon, the fallout had already escaped the mediation room. Isaiah exited through a private courthouse corridor while black SUVs idled outside beneath gray skies and reporters gathered farther down the front steps around another unrelated hearing. Elliot walked beside him quietly holding secured folders beneath one arm. Marcus's lenders are freezing portions of the East Corridor deal pending review, Elliot said carefully. Isaiah nodded once without slowing his pace. And Crowley? Several internal ethics complaints already triggered after the access disclosures. Isaiah said nothing afterward. Rain tapped softly against the courthouse awning while traffic lights reflected across wet streets beyond the barricades. Then Monique stepped into the corridor behind him unexpectedly. Isaiah. Her voice sounded different now. No polish left. No social performance. Just strain. Isaiah turned slowly. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Monique's eyes moved across his face almost like she was trying to reconcile two different versions of the same man at once. The exhausted husband she stopped respecting, and the quiet strategist now dismantling a system she thought had already trapped him. Why didn't you ever tell me? She finally asked softly. Isaiah studied her carefully before answering. You stopped asking about my life a long time ago. The words landed harder than anger would have. Monique looked away immediately afterward, blinking fast while emotion cracked visibly beneath her controlled posture for the first time since this began. But Isaiah still didn't move closer. Because now he understood something she didn't yet fully accept. The collapse unfolding around Marcus wasn't temporary embarrassment. It was structural. Financial reviews. Acquisition freezes. Ethics exposure. Legal scrutiny. Generational land leverage suddenly resurfacing through protected inheritance records. The system they trusted was beginning to turn against itself. Then Isaiah's phone vibrated quietly inside his coat pocket. Elliot glanced toward the screen once before his expression shifted. Isaiah, he lowered his voice carefully. One of Marcus's primary investors just withdrew from the East Corridor Consortium completely. Isaiah looked back toward the rain-covered courthouse entrance where Marcus and Crowley now stood arguing sharply near the security checkpoint while attorneys moved anxiously around them carrying folders and phones. For the first time since this started, Marcus no longer looked powerful. He looked cornered. And across the hallway, Monique finally seemed to realize she hadn't betrayed an exhausted man who worked too much. She had betrayed the quiet foundation holding the entire structure together. 3 weeks later, the rain finally stopped over Houston. Morning light spilled quietly through the tall windows of Isaiah's downtown office while the city below moved with its usual rhythm again, freight traffic rolling across overpasses, distant horns echoing between buildings, sunlight replacing weeks of gray skies. Isaiah stood alone beside the glass holding a cup of untouched coffee while finalized legal documents rested neatly across the conference table behind him. The mediation ended without spectacle. No screaming. No public revenge. Just signatures, protected inheritance confirmations, dissolved claims, and the quiet collapse of every assumption built around him. Marcus's East Corridor Expansion Consortium officially dissolved 2 days earlier after investors withdrew following the ethics investigations tied to unauthorized access reviews and acquisition overlap disclosures. Nathan Crowley quietly resigned from 2 corporate advisory boards before formal disciplinary hearings even began. Isaiah never celebrated any of it. He simply watched the system correct itself once the truth surfaced. The house felt different now too. Quieter in a way that no longer carried tension underneath it. Half-empty shelves remained in the master bedroom where Monique had removed most of her things during the final separation week. One untouched wedding photograph still sat face down near the hallway table beside cold afternoon light drifting through the windows. Isaiah paused there briefly before leaving for work one morning, studying the frame without picking it up. Not anger anymore. Just distance. He finally understood the most painful part wasn't the affair itself. It was realizing how long people around him mistook restraint for weakness and silence for lack of value. Monique called once after the final settlement cleared. Isaiah answered because avoiding the call no longer mattered. Her voice sounded softer now. Tired. I didn't know, she admitted quietly after a long silence. Isaiah looked out across the freight yard beyond his office windows while evening sunlight reflected across shipping containers below. That was the problem, he answered calmly. You stopped trying to know me at all. Neither of them raised their voices. Neither of them tried to repair what was already gone. Some endings didn't need explosions. Just honesty arriving too late. Over the following months, Isaiah gradually stepped away from the 80-hour routines that once controlled his entire life. Not because he lost everything, but because he no longer needed to prove survival through exhaustion anymore. Elliot helped restructure several corridor partnerships into long-term logistics investments while Isaiah quietly expanded inherited holdings his father protected years earlier. The irony stayed with him sometimes. The same calm discipline people dismissed as ordinary had protected him the entire time. At one private infrastructure event months later, Isaiah crossed paths briefly with Valerie Denton inside a quiet hotel ballroom overlooking the city skyline. This time the introductions felt different. Executives approached Isaiah first. Investors listened carefully when he spoke. Nobody confused him for the overworked operations manager anymore. But Isaiah still carried himself exactly the same way he always had. Same measured voice. Same controlled posture. Same quiet awareness. Power did not need performance once people finally recognized it. Late one evening, Isaiah drove alone along the East Corridor route just after sunset while freight lights glowed across the distance beneath darkening skies. The protected land structures his father left behind stretched quietly beyond the highway barriers, untouched by the people who once tried circling them through manipulation and assumptions. Isaiah rested one hand against the steering wheel while the city faded slowly behind him. For the first time in years, his life no longer felt like something he was surviving. It finally felt like something fully under his control again. And somewhere back in Houston, the people who once underestimated him now had to live with a realization far heavier than revenge. The quiet man they dismissed had been the strongest person in the room the entire time. If this story hit harder than you expected, let me know what part stayed with you most, and subscribe for more cinematic stories about betrayal, hidden power, and quiet reversals. Ahead of him, the highway opened into darkness and distant city light while Isaiah's black truck disappeared steadily into the night, calm and unhurried, carrying him toward a future nobody else would ever control again.